Trump, I mean, they can, but do you think that they would feel comfortable doing this to Trump, telling him that?
And take the damn 4 stars off your shoulder. Get the hell out of there because you're a coward. Your job isn't to serve the President of the United States. Your job is to serve the Constitution of the United States. You're there because of the Constitution, not because of the President. And if you're wearing those 4 stars, the Constitution says that your job is to advise the President, not suck up to the President, not lick the President's boot, not kiss his ass. Advise the President about those military matters which matter most to the national security of the United States, like you never talk about Ohio-class submarine deployments ever. Why? Because the Russians got a whole bunch of hunter-killer submarines out there looking for these babies.
My name is Edmund DeMarsh. I'm with the Trends Journal. I'm here with Scott Ritter. Everyone can go out and check him at scottritter.com. That's scottritter.com. Scott, thanks for joining me. We'll get right into it. I saw you on Judge Napolitano's show. I think it aired either Friday or Saturday. And you were talking about Donald Trump's reaction to a post by the former Russian president.
This is about Donald Trump threatening to end the world as we know it because of a mean tweet. But what's even more outrageous is that Donald Trump doesn't understand what Medvedev tweeted. Medvedev was telling Trump to knock it off with the dangerous threats, saying that, if you do this, America can end up looking like the Walking Dead because of the dead hand. The dead hand is a reference to the perimeter system, which is a defensive system put in place by the Soviet Union back in the 1980s, so that if they are ever struck preemptively by the United States, a first strike, by the way, the tactic to be used in a first strike is to bring Ohio-class submarines close to Russia's shores, fire off their Trident missiles on a flattened trajectory to avoid detection so you can strike the targets quicker, which is what Trump just actually appeared to order the U.S. Navy to do. So the dead hand now becomes a factor, because if Trump is dumb enough to launch an attack against Russia, the dead hand, the perimeter system, will ensure that all of Russia's strategic nuclear forces will be fired against the United States, even if Trump takes out Putin, the National Command Authority, etc.
Can you just do a quick summary of what you told Napolitano about the dead hand and what Trump may have gotten wrong when he read that from the Post?
Well, first of all, we need to set this up properly. Dmitry Medvedev, the former president of Russia, former prime minister, and current deputy chair of the National Security Council for Russia, of Russia, Vladimir Putin, the president, is the chair, has a wonderful relationship with his ex account. I mean, I'm not here to denigrate or say, I'm just, in America, we would call it, it's a troll account. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm just saying that he trolls America. He trolls stupid American politicians. He trolls stupid European politicians. He trolls stupidity. Anybody who makes an ignorant anti-Russian statement, you can be damn sure Dmitry Medvedev is going to be on him like white on rice. And I'm not saying this is a negative thing. It's entertaining as hell. And it's also informative, because sometimes the best slapdowns are those that are, they're more effective because they're fact-based. Dmitry Medvedev comes in with heavy facts that just slams the ignorance of the West. But it's not official state policy. It's Dmitry Medvedev's personal account. Yes, he's a former president. You can't, you'd be foolish to pretend that his words have no meaning. He's former prime minister, the same thing, and he's currently number 2 on the National Security Council of Russia. So I don't want to say that his words have no meaning, but he's not currently the chief executive of Russia, meaning that he doesn't make the final decisions. That is the sole purview of the current chief executive of Russia, Vladimir Putin. So while you have to sit up and pay attention to what Dmitry Medvedev tweets, you certainly don't take action on it, because it's not like, for instance, Donald Trump's social media platform, Truth Social, where when the president of the United States tweets something or posts something, that becomes official policy, declarative policy on the part of the president. So we need to put things into a perspective. 2, we have to look at the history, the chain of posts that led to this, the exchange you're speaking of. Lindsey Graham, a senator from South Carolina, has been on an anti-Russian tirade of late, seeking to pressure the president of the United States, Donald Trump, into enacting harsh measures against Russia for failing to bend the knee to the will of the president. Lindsey Graham, has a history of making very provocative, some would say warlike statements about Russia, about what American policy should be. And in this case, the statements that he was alluding to went beyond simply sanctioning Russia. Lindsey Graham is of the belief that if you sanction nations that buy Russian oil, you can bankrupt Russia and somehow prevent Russia from continuing the conflict. But when people started to push back, and even before that, he also announced that there were things that could be done to Russia, that Russia's leadership wasn't immune to potential military action. He hinted at the possibility of a first strike against Russia by the United States or its proxies, in this case, Ukraine, armed with American long-range weaponry. And it's in this context that Dmitry Medvedev put out his tweet that's basically said, look, just in order to avoid a Walking Dead type situation, and Walking Dead is in reference to the very popular TV show that shows sort of a post-apocalyptic world filled with zombies chasing down and eating or otherwise rendering dead, Walking Dead, the living. It's an illusion that's made about what life would be like on the planet after a nuclear war. So in order to avoid this, America should, or at least those posting anti-Russian sentiments, should remember that there's something called the dead hand in Russia. Now, the president took umbrage against this because he, in his extremely articulate English, if you go nuclear, you got to take nuclear seriously. And so you go nuclear, you got to do nuclear. And I do nuclear because I'm the president of the United States. Nobody does nuclear better than me. And so he either directed the deployment or directed the redeployment of 2 Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines. These are basically the mainstay of the American nuclear triad. Triad is, we have 3 legs of our strategic nuclear forces. We have land-based, silo-based missiles, the Minuteman III. We have the B-2s and the B-52s that are capable of carrying nuclear weapons. And then we have the Ohio-class submarines with their Trident missiles. Each Trident missile can carry multiple nuclear warheads. At any given time, we have between 4 and 6 Trident Ohio-class submarines on station. Generally 4, 2 in each ocean, 2 in the Atlantic, 2 in the Pacific, usually 2 en route to replace. So 6. We have a total of 14, but some are being refurbished, refueled, etc. So he ordered the movement of 2 Ohio-class submarines, according to the president, closer to Russia. These are very important words, closer to Russia. It's a direct threat to the Russians. It's saying, here's this ballistic missile carrying submarine that basically has the ability to take out 50, 60 Russian cities, and we're moving 2 of them closer to your shores. Now we come back to the dead hand. Why would Dmitry Medvedev raise the dead hand? Of course, he was a little coy. He said, if it exists. Well, the dead hand is a nickname given to a system called Perimeter. Perimeter is a real system that was created by the Soviet Union back in the 1980s. The purpose of Perimeter, and this is very important, people need to understand this aspect of it. The Russians were getting very concerned that the United States was positioning itself to carry out a decapitating first strike against Russia, meaning that they could take out Russian leadership and the bulk of Russia's nuclear forces, creating a situation where surviving Russians would have to say, gosh, if we fire what we have left, we're all going to die. Maybe we stop this now. That was the thinking, that you decapitate, you reduce, and then you intimidate the Russians into submission.
And this is back in the 80s.
Excuse me. Ah, man. I'm having a dry throat day.
And so all this was happening back in the 80s, Scott?
Back in the 80s. We were back in the 80s, we were beginning to deploy the Ohio-class submarine in meaningful numbers. And we're also initiating the deployment of the Pershing II intermediate range missile. The Pershing II is a solid rocket missile when deployed in West Germany, could hit Moscow within 7 to 12 minutes of being launched. Nuclear. The Ohio-class submarines with their Trident missiles, and again, this is the important part, if they leave their standard stations and move closer to the Russian shores, can fire the Tridents on a reduced trajectory so they can come in under traditional over-the-horizon radar detection systems and strike their targets within 20 minutes of launch. So the Russians were like, wait a minute now. If they can take out our leadership in 7 to 12 minutes, take out our nuclear forces in 20 minutes, we're in trouble. How do we respond to this? The answer was perimeter. Perimeter is a system that has a whole bunch of detectors around all over the Soviet Union, radiation detection, seismic detection, and then they also have an ability to monitor communications. There's a continuous check that goes on from central authority to the various nuclear forces, feedback loop that make sure, hey, this is us. Can you hear us? Yeah, we can hear you. Can you hear us? Yes, we're both alive and well, good. And they continuously do this. Perimeter is a system that's designed that if you detect radiation spikes, seismic spikes, and communication goes down, you assume a decapitation strike has taken place. And now the dead hand comes in. The Russians originally had built these missiles that were in silos using, I think it was the SS-17, and they had a communications module on top of it. And so this would be fired up and fly across the Soviet Union, broadcasting launch codes.
Through a missile,
launch codes
through a warhead. You're saying
there's no warhead on it. They replaced the warhead with a communications system, broadcasting the launch codes, and any surviving Russian nuclear systems would automatically fire against the United States. Now, the Russians went, well, we have that in the silo, but what if the Americans take the silo out? How do we back it up? So they had a system called the SS-20. It was an intermediate range system. And they converted one regiment of the SS-20s into missiles carrying these communications devices. And a regiment is 3 battalions of 3 mobile launchers each. At any time, there would be 3 to 6 of these missiles out in the field on duty, meaning they're no longer in their garrison. So even if you come in and hit their garrison, they're already deployed. And at least one of them is going to survive, and it's going to fire, and it will launch, and everything's dead. Now, people have always said, well, do we know this system existed? We do know it existed because those SS-20 missiles were covered by the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty and were subject to destruction under the INF Treaty. And so the Russians or the Soviets sought to replace them with SS-25 missiles, an intercontinental missile, mobile. And in order to do that, though, you had to modify the missile, the SS-25. You had to do some tests, and then you have to produce the missiles. They come out of the Vodkin's machine building plant where we inspectors were monitoring. We were trying to install this giant cargo scan X-ray machine to make sure that every missile came out, got X-rayed, so we could determine that it was an SS-25, not an SS-20. While that cargo scan was being built, though, missiles still came out, so we would do visual inspections of them randomly. I write about this in my book, Disarming the Time of Perestroika. Through the monitoring of the material going in and the stuff coming out, it became clear that there were 3 kinds of missiles coming out of Vodkin's. There was the SS-25, which was permitted by treaty. There was something we called the we call it the partitioned missile. It was a short missile, the length of which did not make it a treaty limited item, and therefore not subjected to inspection. So the Russians, when they brought it out, would put a partition in the rail car, and we would just measure that distance. That was a missile called the Courier missile. It was a small ICBM that was under development at the time. But then there was a 3rd missile type coming out, and I believe it was a modification of the SS-25, because we were looking at different rail numbers, meaning you have to break the code of the numbers on the rail cars. They come in, they come out, and you had a different rail series, which means that they are being sent to a different place than the other missiles. And so you could look at this, and I was able to break the code of the rail numbers and do dead-on accurate predictions of when one of these modified missiles would be coming out. And that's how I knew that I was onto something, because I would look at the incoming stuff and say, they have 5 normal missiles but 3 modified missiles based upon the production schedule that you ascertained by watching. I said, a modified missile will come out on this date, this date, this date, and I called it, and it happened. And I went, okay, we're on to something here. Now we get to the part where we're trying to activate the cargo scan. And I told my authorities, I said, look, they have 3 modified missiles in there. They aren't going to want us to X-ray. So we need to get ready for a crisis. And sure enough, there was. When we tried to activate the cargo scan system, the Russians went, no, we're not allowing this to happen. And they got those 3 missiles out. And there was an international crisis. And then we resolved it and all that. But those missiles they got out were the last 3 Sirena missiles, modified SS-25s to carry this thing. And they were deployed so they could get that replacement regiment up and running so that the dead hand system was active. The dead hand is active today. The SS-25s have been replaced with SS-27s, the even more modern version, but it's there. And this is what Medvedev was alluding to, the dead hand system. And he basically said, if you're thinking about launching a preemptive strike against us, we got the dead hand. You're going to die. And Donald Trump, because he's an idiot, because he's advised by idiots, because he doesn't listen to his intelligence, maybe his intelligence doesn't know what I know. They should. I wrote a whole bunch of reports, and it got me a classified commendation from the director of the CIA. So it's in the system. But he somehow was threatened by the fact that Medvedev was saying, if you attack us, we're going to kill you all. So what does he do? He orders 2 Ohio-class submarines to go closer to Russia. The very scenario the dead hand system was created to protect the Russians from. This man is a moron. He's a dangerous moron. I mean, this is stupidity of the highest order. What I'm hoping is that, he put out this social media post directing. I'm hoping there was pushback from people. First of all, if I were if in command of the submarine forces, I'd say, Mr. President, we don't talk about submarine deployments ever. Because
Trump, I mean, they can, but do you think that they would feel comfortable doing this to Trump, telling him that?
And take the damn 4 stars off your shoulder, get the hell out of there because you're a coward. Your job isn't to serve the President of the United States. Your job is to serve the Constitution of the United States. You're there because of the Constitution, not because of the President. And if you're wearing those 4 stars, the Constitution says that your job is to advise the President, not suck up to the President, not lick the President's boot, not kiss his ass. Advise the President about those military matters which matter most to the national security of the United States, like you never talk about Ohio-class submarine deployments ever. Why? Because the Russians got a whole bunch of hunter-killer submarines out there looking for these babies. Because if there's ever going to be a nuclear war, the best way you survive a nuclear war is to blow up submarine missile-carrying submarines before they launch their missiles. And so these submarines deploy in great secrecy. They sink to the bottom of the ocean. They rarely come up to get communications, and they go back down so that if they ever get the launch instructions, they go up and they can launch and do their job. If they get killed afterwards, so sad, too bad, shouldn't have joined the Navy. But their job is to be there to launch missiles. So you don't talk about it. The president just talked about it. Not only talked about a way that directly threatens Russia. So now the Russians are going to be looking for 2 Ohio-class submarines on the move closer to borders. And the Russians have already said, we know where your submarines are. Whether they do or not, I don't know. And they said, and we'll be tracking them, which means now the likelihood of a Russian hunter-killer behind an Ohio-class submarine moving close, if there's one mistake, they're going to sink that son of a bitch and kill everybody on board and probably trigger a nuclear war in result. This president is the dumbest man that ever walked the face of the earth, literally the stupidest man. And I have no respect for anybody who around him who, having seen this post, didn't immediately come up to him and say, stop. No, we don't do that. We don't do that, Mr. President. Fact is, if I were wearing 4 stars, I would have said, you may have ordered the movement, but I'm telling you right now, we're not moving because you just put them at risk. Unless you are telling us you're going to attack Russia, in which case I'll say that's an unconstitutional order because there's no, prerequisite. You don't meet any of the standards for launching this attack. What you're going to, proportionality. You're going to nuke Russia for a mean tweet. No, Mr. President, the Constitution says you're not going to nuke Russia for a mean tweet because it's against the laws of war. I mean, these are things like that these guys with 4 stars need to be doing. And if they can't do it, they need to take the 4. This is why it's dangerous to let the president handpick the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as he did in the case of Raising Cane. Raising Cane wasn't qualified to be a 3-star, let alone a 4-star, but now he's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff because he kissed the president ass better than any frickin' general in the United States Air Force today. We don't need ass kissers. We need ass kickers, meaning they're willing to kick the president's ass if he does something stupid. That's their job, is to stand up and say, no, Mr. President, that's not how it works. That's not how it's going to happen. Yes, they have to obey a lawful order, but moving submarines closer to the Russian shore because of a mean tweet, it comes as close to an unlawful order as I can imagine, because it deliberately puts American troops in harm's way and increases the threshold of the probability of a third world war that'll end all life on this planet.
How dangerous is it that Trump does surround himself with so many real sycophants, at least what it appears to be? You have Pete Hegseth as the head of the Pentagon. Then you just mentioned Raising Cain. It seems like Trump only associates with people who look up to him and are yes men. And so does this give Trump even more power than a normal president in his administration?
What it does is it eliminates the checks and balances that we, the American people, expect to exist. We do have a constitution. We have given the president unmatched authority when it comes to the launch of nuclear weapons. He is it. He's the one who gives the orders. But we do have a system in place, based on the Constitution that says we won't violate international humanitarian law. We won't commit war crimes. And for a president to order a nuclear strike without just cause, just to do it on a whim, or to put the United States in a position where nuclear war becomes inevitable because of a mean tweet, normally we would have checks and balances in place. At least people would step up and say, no, Mr. President, this is wrong. This is stupid. Who's advising him on the social media post? Since when do we announce Ohio-class submarine movements by social media post? If he wanted to move those submarines, he would issue a classified order, because the movement of a submarine is a class. You remember back when people got angry at Pete Hegseth because he was part of a Signal chat room where he talked about, potential, attacks against Houthi targets, and they said, my God, you just put those pilots at risk, and everybody got in an outrage. How come no one's in an outrage that he just put the Ohio-class submarines at risk? Because the last thing in God's earth you do is publicly announce the movement of Ohio-class submarines.
How stealth are these subs? Can Russia, I mean, you mentioned before that Russia says they can track these subs, or at least knows their whereabouts. Are these submarines as stealth? Are they equivalents of, let's say, a B-2 bomber flying to Iran to drop bombs? Or are they more stealthy? How would you compare the stealth of a sub, an Ohio-class sub, compared to anything else? Like, is Russia are Russia and the U.S. essentially peers in the submarine game? Or does one have one edged out in your opinion?
I am not, I am not a submarine guy. I only know what I've read about. I haven't experienced any of this firsthand. But I will say, as an intelligence officer who operate at the strategic level, from the moment the Ohio-class submarine began to be built. Let me put it this way. I'll just tell a reverse war story. My mentor in the Marine Corps was a Marine Colonel named George Murdoch Connell, Silver Star winner, Vietnam hero, infantry stud warrior. And sometime in the 1970s, he decided he was going to transition to becoming a Russian foreign area officer. And he did. And as a lieutenant colonel, he worked in the embassy in Moscow in the 1980s. One of the highest priorities of collection at that time was submarine manufacturing taking place in the vicinity of Leningrad. They were putting together a new class of submarine. I think it was the Akula. But the satellites couldn't take pictures because the Russians knew where the satellites were coming over, and they put screens up, and so the satellite couldn't get the angle and all this stuff. But what they noticed is that there was a gap between the wall and the overhang. And George Connell, because he's a very intrepid man, he and actually a British intelligence officer stationed in Moscow, they determined that if they could get on board one of these ferry boats that transits Leningrad at the time, and they could get up in the vicinity of the smokestack, they could actually peer through that gap and take photographs. And so they went to Leningrad, they shook their KGB handlers, and they got on board at night while nobody's on the boat, and they tied themselves into the funnel. See, the funnel's not functional because it's no longer a coal-fired system. It's using a different, a diesel. And so they tied themselves in, and when the appropriate time came, they got up, and as the ship went by, they took a whole bunch of high-resolution photographs using Tecpan film on a black and white Nikon. I mean, all the stuff they're trained to do. Now, then they got off, and they sequestered the film canisters where the sun don't shine, because they knew the KGB was looking for them. Sure enough, the KGB cornered them on the boat, but they have diplomatic immunity. KGB wanted to seize their cameras. So George Connell threw his camera into the water, and so did the Brit. And the KGB went after the cameras, and these guys went back to Moscow, recovered their film. It was developed, the imagery that they took basically saved the United States hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe $1 billion, in developing countermeasures for the Soviet submarines. That's the reason why I bring this up is, A, it's a cool story.
That is a cool story. How is that not a movie? How is that not like Mission Impossible?
There's so much that was done in the Cold War that should be made a movie. That's not. Don't ask me. I mean, it should be made a movie. Well, truth is better than fiction. I'm just telling you that. Someday I'll tell you about the other colonel who went on a long trip throughout the Soviet Union, took a whole bunch of really cool notes, but they used a special kind of paper, water-soluble paper that you could put in your mouth and make it go away. And he had the notes sequestered in a pocket here, and they got out to drink in a river, and he was drinking the river. The notes fell out of his into the river. There went all the notes. so much for that trip. But
oh man!
But the point is, there was this kind of, and the Russians were doing it to us. We were doing it to them. Submarines were the highest collection priority because so much rides on them. And the reason why I bring this up is to say that when you apply talent like George Murdoch Connell and others to a problem for a period of time, they will find a solution. And if the Russians have been looking at how to track Ohio-class submarines since the moment the Ohio-class submarine was fielded in the 1980s. That's 40 years. I would say that there's a better than 80% chance that they can track the Ohio-class submarine. And that's why what we do, once we realize there's a technical vulnerability, that's why we're going to try and produce a new class of submarine that creates different technologies that make it harder to detect. B, when those vulnerabilities come up, then stealth and secrecy become even more important, meaning that if your ship now has some vulnerabilities that can't be detected, you need to operate in a manner which reduces those vulnerabilities. And one of the ways you do is you don't tell them when you move, so that whatever detection capabilities they have out there aren't optimized to collect your movement. You use a little bit of sleight of hand. You maybe do an exercise. I'm speculating here. I don't want anybody to think that I'm, but you do something, so you go, hey, we're going over here, but really you go over here. Then you get low and you disappear. And then you don't talk and you don't move. You don't move. Why don't you move? Use your brain housing group. A submarine is very big. It displaces a lot of water. And if it's moving, the displacement of that much water using the high technologies available today makes it eminently detectable. And they're not just looking at you from above, they're looking at you from below. They're looking at you from the side, and they're taking all of these sensors, and when they detect, I'm just spitballing here, saying that, yeah, the Russians track the Ohio-class submarine. If we're lucky enough to get an Ohio-class submarine out into a station and down low and without being detected, from a nuclear deterrent standpoint, that's what we want. We want every enemy to believe that if they attack the United States with nuclear weapons, we have submarines down there that they don't know where they're at, and they're going to come up and they're going to fire their complement and they're going to kill you. 100% certain guaranteed death. We want that. What we don't want to do is start moving these frickin' things around and letting the enemy know that we're moving them around, so now they can optimize their detection and they can find it, because then we've lost deterrence. And we've created the potential for a war, because now the Russians are going to view it as a threat. As I said, Dead Hand was created because of the potential of Ohio-class submarine coming close to Russian shores, firing their tridents at a reduced trajectory to hit their targets within 20 minutes of launch. The President of the United States just ordered 2 Ohio-class submarines to go closer to Russia's shores. What the hell do you think the Russians are thinking right now? This is a game? That he's an idiot? Well, I don't know what they're thinking about this president, but it's not a game. This is their lives. So they are putting everything they have out there to look for. Now, is the president playing a game by pretending to deploy him? Is he that clever? Do we want a president playing games with our lives? Our lives? Because that's what he's doing. He's gambling with your life, my life, and everybody's watching this show's life. No, this is irresponsibility of the highest order.
I just want to go over this real fast, Scott. I know we've been talking now for a little over 30 minutes, so maybe 5 more minutes. Would that work for you?
Sure.
Okay, so this isn't the first time that Trump threatened another country with nuclear bombs. During his first administration, he was dealing with North Korea, and that resulted in him saying to Kim Jong-un that he has a much bigger and more powerful button than he does. And then also Dianne Feinstein, the former Democrat from California, She once said that the longer I'm in the Senate, the more I fear for a major error that somebody makes. One man, the president, is responsible. He makes an error, and who knows, it's Armageddon. Is Trump a danger? And what do we have anything to stop him if he calls, if tonight he says to Pete Hegseth, let's do a preemptive strike on Russia? Because we have to have different standards for something that's a preemptive nuclear strike and a retaliatory nuclear strike, right? From the president's standpoint, it can't be the same rules. The rules can't be the same. And are they?
The whole concept of preemption, if it's done properly, is to say, for instance, right now, if I'm the president of the United States, I'm looking at the Russian strategic nuclear arsenal. They have the Submarine missile. It's a super heavy missile that comes in from the south, not the north. A lot of warheads, including the ability to deploy the avant-garde hypersonic maneuverable warhead. And the bottom line is 1 or 2 Sarmats and America's taken off the map. So I'm very worried about the Sarmat. I'm very worried about some of the more advanced mobile missiles because we can't detect them. They're out there. They fire the avant-garde hypersonic missile. They fire other warhead. They fire other warheads of great capability. I'm worried about their submarines because they just deployed the most advanced submarine in the world. We keep talking about American submarine technology. The Russians just deployed a submarine that carries 96 nuclear warheads on using, I guess they're called RS-56 Bulova missiles. I mean, they're out there and we can't detect them. The Russians every once in a while make that point because what will happen is out of the blue, a Russian submarine will surface off the coast of the east coast of the United States. And the Americans go, what the hell's a Russian doing there? How'd it get there? And it's just the Russians saying, gotcha. If we were a missile carrying submarine, you'd all be dead because you had no clue we were here. So the Russians are pretty damn good at what they do. So now I'm the president. And let's say that Vladimir Putin had the Russian, they call it a V contact. Let's say he had a V contact page. That's their version of Facebook. And Vladimir Putin was starting to post things like, first of all, Vladimir Putin arbitrarily just flies, a bunch of nuclear weapons into Venezuela, where the Russians now are deploying strategic bombers. Now, why do I say that? Because Donald Trump just deployed a bunch of B-61-12 nuclear bombs into England. Just deployed them there. Talking about guys playing around with the nuclear button. That's him. He just went ahead and told the Russians, yeah, no, we're not trying to de-escalate. I'm escalating. I'm putting more nuclear weapons out there. Let's say the Russians did that. And then, we intercepted some message traffic to show that the submarines were entering closer, something that indicated they may have already received launch codes and maybe an indication of the date. We start looking at the Russian mobile missiles and they're leaving their garrisons. Their bombers are, going off to, forward bases. And my guys come to me and say, Mr. President, the Russians are going to attack us at 0300 tomorrow. That's our belief. Now I'm the president of the United States. I can A, wait till 0300 to see if they attack us, or B, preempt them. It's a fair thing. Preemption gives me a chance of survival. If they're really going to attack me with everything at 3 a.m., once they launch, it's over. All I can do is destroy them. But if I launch a preemptive attack, maybe I can knock out enough of theirs that we can somehow come out of this ahead. It's an insane thing, this Armageddon thing. But I'm just saying that there is a perverse logic to preemption that again, if I were the Russians and I look at the president moving Ohio-class submarines and putting missiles or putting warheads into England, I'd say maybe we need to start thinking about preemption, because this president's gone crazy. Not get ready for preemption, but we have to be thinking about preemption. What happens if we start detecting more movement on the part of the United States strategic nuclear force? What happens if, because on a monthly basis at least, we fly a couple B-52s out of England, on a strike profile that takes them down the Baltic Sea directly towards St. Petersburg. And at the last possible minute, they break off. But if they didn't break off and they continued and they launched air-launched cruise missiles, nuclear capable, they take out St. Petersburg, the Kola Peninsula, and other strategic forces within minutes of launch. And we do this repeatedly. We're testing the Russian system. And the Russians are watching them come in. We do it in the Black Sea coming up. We do it in the Pacific. And what if the Russians say, okay, well, we believe the next time they do this, they're going to actually launch. So rather than wait for them to launch, why don't we shoot down their B-52s and then nuke their things, sink their subs, and do a little preemptive work of our own? This is preemption. Both sides have a preemptive doctrine. Both us and the Russians now have a doctrine of preemption. The Russian preemption is a little bit different. They basically said, we won't be the first to launch, but we won't be the last. Meaning, if they detect launch, then they're going to come at everything.
And launch meaning movement.
No,
Launch is
launch meaning if they
actual
detect one
fire up.
launch, yeah, then they're going to kill everybody. They don't believe in limited nuclear war. We, on the other hand, have this stupidity where we think we can escalate to de-escalate, meaning that if we strike the Russians decisively with nuclear weapons, take out their evil leadership, what survives will say, oh God, please let us live. We won't fire anything in return. We'll voluntarily disarm and America wins. We have idiots who believe that, like Pete Hegseth. He believes that. Like Raising Cain, he believes that. This is the problem with surrounding yourself with sycophants. You see, I mean, if I were president, I never will be, but if I were president, I'd want one or two people close to me who I trusted implicitly, who were on my side, advocates of my position, because you need advocates. You have to have advocates. You have to have backup. You're not awake 24/7. You could be on trip. I need a chief of staff who's advocating for me. I might even want a national security advisor who's my advocate. But then I would pick my secretaries to be people who were politically compatible, but experts in their fields, because their job is not to kiss my ass. Their job is to advise me and to take what I put, the policies that are developed, and adequately implement these policies. And I'd want generals who are the best in the business, not because they're Republican or Democrat, but because they're really good at their job. Men of honor who take their constitutional oath seriously, so that when the time comes for me to get advice from them, I know that their advice is genuine, that it's not slanted to please me. I don't want you to please me in a time of crisis. I want you to be honest with me. There was an old saying in the intelligence business: if you lie, they die, meaning all of the people we're supposed to be trying to protect by gathering this intelligence. If we tell lies, if we take shortcuts, if we crib, if we do something, if we show a lack of integrity just to please our boss, the end result is dead Americans. Our job is to be as accurate as possible so that those whom we advise are operating with the best possible information. My job was never to make my boss happy with what I said. My job was to give them the truth, even if it made them unhappy, because then with the truth, they could make decisions that were fact-based. You can't solve a problem unless you adequately define it. And if I'm blowing smoke up your butt to make you happy, you're not solving any problem. You're just creating more problems, and people will die. The president has surrounded himself with ass kissers. And so if there is a crisis, not a single one of them is going to stand up and say, excuse me, Mr. President, that's dumber than dirt idea. That's not what we do. Let's do something else. Let's do this. Let's do that. General Mark Miley, I'm not a big fan of him, but I will say this: Mark Miley, when he was the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff on a couple of occasions, made it be known that he's not, for instance, he told the Chinese, I will let you know before this goes crazy, just so the Chinese don't overreact, because the president was doing stupid shit, stupid stuff, moving stuff around, causing problems. The Chinese are like, what do we do? Preempt? And Miley was saying, no. Do not do anything. This man's insane. We'll make sure that the insanity doesn't translate into action. And people call him a traitor because he betrayed an insane president. No, he served his country. He saved his country from the potential of a nuclear war. We need really good advisors around the president. And sadly, we don't, Tulsi Gabbard is one, but the president's already said when he disagrees with her, he pushes her aside like he did with Iran. RFK Jr. is able to stand up to him, but he's limited at Health and Human Services. I mean, he's not on the national security team. So what can he do there? Hegseth is just an ass kisser, straight up ass kisser. Raising Cain. These are the two people that matter the most. We don't have a national security advisor. We have a Secretary of State dual-hatted, which is constitutionally questionable to begin with, because who does he work for? The president or the American people? As Secretary of State, he's held accountable to the United States Senate, which ratified him. As National Security Advisor, he doesn't have to report to the Senate because he works directly for the president. Now we have a Secretary of State can decide when it's convenient to be Secretary of State or National Security Advisor. This is a really dangerous situation that we're in right now.
I have just there's a real fast two questions, Scott. I'll make this one part. Does the U.S. have the equivalence of a dead hand response? You mentioned before, you went into great detail about how Russia has that launched capability of alerting all their 10,000 or so missiles to fire if the U.S. launches a successful preemptive strike. Does the U.S. have an equivalence of a dead hand if attacked by Russia? And then my last question before I let you go, and I appreciate your time. Can Trump wiggle out of this one by saying, well, I ordered them to relocate me in the submarines, but I didn't tell you when? So can Trump technically wiggle out of that by saying, hey, I order them to relocate, didn't tell you when? So I'd like to just hear if you could go into those two questions. One, does the U.S. have the dead hand? And can Trump get out of this one by saying, I ordered them, but I didn't say when they'll be moving?
Well, if we have a dead hand, I don't know about it, and that means that I shouldn't know about it, and that's top secret and code word and all that other stuff. So I don't know if we have a dead hand. I do know that we have redundancy, and we have the ability to transfer command from, say, the president to the head of strategic command, who has his own airborne command post that can launch. We have redundancy in that. So while we may not have a system designed from the ground up like the dead hand, we have enough redundancy in our national command and control to ensure that in almost any scenario, we will have the ability to have continuity of launch release authority, which is the equivalent of dead hand. As long, the goal here is to ensure that we can launch our nuclear missiles under any circumstance. So even though we may not call it the dead hand, it may not be structured like the perimeter system. I would say that the United States has enough resiliency and redundancy in its national command and control capabilities to have the equivalent of a dead hand, meaning that you're not going to launch a preemptive strike against the United States and somehow prevent yourself from being hit by our nuclear retaliation. If you hit us with nukes, you're going to be disappeared. That's a guarantee. The second question was?
The second question, down the road, if this thing blows up a little bit.
Oh, did Trump get away?
Yeah, does he get away with it if he says, hey, well, I told him to move. I didn't say exactly when, so,
Well, I mean, in theory, no, because, he showed himself to be irresponsible, and that should color the judgment of the American people. To get away with it, what do you mean to get away with it?
Politically to avoid this from becoming, like you said before, a signal chat point two.
But we have so many. I mean, Trump's base is a cult. It's not your standard political base. It's not composed of politically astute people who care about America more than they care about the man. This is literally a cult of personality. People who just believe that whatever Trump does is golden. You don't question the man. The man's a genius. I mean, again, it reminds me of, have you seen Apocalypse Now? Yeah. Dennis Hopper's, outstanding, freaked out war correspondent talking about Marlon Brando, Colonel Kurtz. I mean, the man he's out there, man. I mean, he sees things that you can't see. He thinks in ways you can't. I mean, this is MAGA. MAGA is not a bunch of, academics and sound people who are sitting here going, this is good policy. MAGA's full of Dennis Hopper type characters. The man just sees things that, I mean, when he breathes the molecules infiltrate his body differently than they do us, and it infuses him with mad genius. I mean, my God, the snail crossed a razor blade. This is MAGA. So no, there will be no political consequences for this president from the people that matter. The people that don't matter are the people who, aren't going to support Donald Trump, and he doesn't care about you. In fact, he'll just go into another denigration attack and all this stuff. And then what happens is MAGA jumps on board and goes, yeah, you're an idiot. How dare you question the president of the United States? I mean, what do you know about Ohio-class submarines? Well, a hell of a lot more than you do. This president knows more than you do. No, he doesn't. So, no, I don't think there'll be any political cost to this president.
Scott Ritter, thank you for joining me with the Trends Journal. Please, everyone who's watching now, go check out scottritter.substack.com and give him a follow. Follow him on YouTube. He does Ritter rants nearly daily, right? Right, Scott? You go on YouTube about daily to do the Ritter rants?
I try to take the weekend off because I have a producer who assists me, and she deserves some rest. So, but from Monday to Friday, but last Friday I put out 2 because I put out one in the morning, and then this madness about the submarines happened, so we went ahead and did a second one. So the rants will go out whenever a thought crosses my mind that's worthy of a rant.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining the Trends Journal. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. And again, I apologize for my cough, but there's not much I can do about it.
Enjoy the rest of the day, Scott.